this month, for the community call, we are focusing on one topic, again, like we did last month, rather than having a panel of presenters. We are focusing on one area of research that is under a project that is funded both by the Sloan Foundation, for which we're very grateful, and the European Union Horizon 2020 program. In this project, we are exploring the topic of distributed contracting and contracting in a decentralized way. Before we jump into that, I want to make sure that you've all seen the link here. It's also in the chat. This is where we will be taking our notes. Before we head into the topical discussion itself, I will be welcoming you, which is what I've just done, and then I'll give you a couple of updates from this network, the Internet of Production Alliance.
Open.
And then we will head to a conversation with our speakers, which will be mostly an open discussion. So, updates from the network. There are only two updates I want to put on your radar to make sure that you hear them. The first one is that on April 12th or 13th, we're still waiting for confirmation from the speakers, we will host a dedicated call with as many people of the community as possible on Open Nowhere, this initiative that started with a standard for mapping, well, for standardizing manufacturing locations and how those can be mapped. It will be a bit of a story time because the initiative is now 2 years old since launch of the standard, 3 years since the start of the work, and a lot has happened over the last year. A lot has happened over the last 3 years. So we'll be taking you through all these different chapters, especially since there's now a multitude of ways in which people could engage, either in actually tooling or in the standard or in manufacturing locations. Mapping manufacturing locations themselves. So we felt like it was time for an overview because there are a lot of new members and a lot of new people that we're engaging with who don't have that sort of overview of what it is and how they can engage. So keep your eye open. There'll be a newsletter specifically on that to let you know what the final date is. It'll also be on the forum. So that's April 12th or 13th. The second save the date is a bit more specific in terms of timing. On April 20th, at 5 p.m. CET, so that's the time that it is in Paris and in Copenhagen, there will be a call that is convened by the governance task force of the Internet of Production Alliance. This group has been working on rebooting, doing a version 2.0 of how the alliance is governed. The first version was created in 2018 and it was due for a reboot, or at least a version 2. They've been working for 6 months on high-level propositions, and it's time for a checkpoint with the community to see if those high-level concepts are good to go for further exploration, so that we don't go too deep into ideas that actually are not the direction that the community wants. So keep those dates in your calendar, join them, and if you're not subscribed to the newsletter, maybe we can share that in the chat as well. So that you can hear about those exact dates, and the registration links for that are also up and running, at least for the governance call. So that was it for the updates on the community. So I am now ready to hand over to the topic of in an Internet of Production, how might we contract, which will be led by Tiberius and Maisem, who are here on the call. Before they start speaking, I just want to give a little bit of context, which I touched upon just before. In 2021, some of the members of the Internet of Production Alliance got together to write a proposal to the Sloan Foundation, in which they articulated the idea of a framework of 5 categories of tools, standards, specifications that would encompass a lot of what you need to manufacture things where they are needed. Some of that is already up and running, at least in terms of first versions. We started looking at documentations and designs. We started looking at this question of where you can manufacture things. What might be a standard for mapping manufacturing locations. One of those elements of research is the latest one that we've kicked off, which is this one. And it asks the question, if we were to manufacture things in many locations rather than in one, if we were to manufacture at point of need, if we were to manufacture with entities and individuals that aren't your usual players of big manufacturers who are used to international contracts in the thousands and millions of items, what we currently have in terms of contract infrastructure, in terms of what it is that person A and person B agree on with a signed contract, with an army of lawyers, what currently exists, that's not a match for the complexity that we're talking about. At least that's not a match for the use cases of the people that had been writing this proposal. They were really struggling to figure out how to actually make contracts to get things manufactured. So we brought together a group of people interested in this over the past year, 2022. I had a couple of calls, which concluded in, we really need someone to dig deeper into that, to look into maybe what's already being done, or who is already trying to work on this and is struggling, who has some great ideas. And this is where we put out a call for someone to do research and community engagement on this topic, and where we recruited Tiberius, who I will be introducing with this next slide. Tiberius, in turn, brought on more people to look into this research. A lot of them are here in the call, and this is where I hand over to them so that they can tell you what they've been up to. That was all for me for now.
Thank you very much. Can we see if we can share the screen? No, I cannot share the screen. I think I still have the same problem with my computer. Can you, Barbara, share our presentation and go to slide 2? Yeah, no, the other one. Yes, so, same one. I think you have to deactivate this presenting mode and just go to the other one. Sorry for the interruptions. So meanwhile, yeah, you can go there. So you'll have some clicking around here to do, but I'm running Linux on my machine, and since an update, I cannot share screen on Zoom, so there's some sort of incompatibility. Yeah. So so can you go to the next slide? Slide. Yes. So you, Barbara, presented these 5 areas of work of Internet of Production Alliance. And so we're focusing on the 5th one, which is the last one that was opened to work on. And if you go to the next slide, so the question that was asked by IOPA, the initial problem statement was, enable reliable, robust contracting of all parties, including distributed manufacturing. So this is what we were called on working on, and then we realized that this might be a little bit too constraining as a problem statement, and we came up with a new one, which is more focusing on dependability. Why? Well, because some peer production operations do not rely on legal means or tech means, and you have a great video there with a very interesting character. His name is Jack from Plenty for All. He helps communities in Africa to develop open source hardware solutions to their problems, agriculture, community education, and all sorts of things. And as you will discover in this video, there's other dimensions that are working to make his initiative a success without signing any legal contract, without using any technology or smart contracts. So we thought that contracting and contract are tools, and perhaps the end goal that needs to be explicitly mentioned here is dependability or reliability. So when we talk about distributed manufacturing and local manufacturing as a process, and we talk about the organizations that make that happen, like a network of fab labs, in relation with some NGOs. If we see that network as an organization, the question is, how can we make that dependable? How can we rely on it the way we rely on the supply chain when things go well, and the world is not disrupted by a pandemic or, I don't know, some other calamity? Can we also rely or depend on these networks to supply something to local people in need of that thing? and so then we discovered that there are other dimensions than just contracts, legal contracts, and smart contracts. And yeah, so again, I invite you to I think the presentation, if we share it after, there's a link, direct link here that so people can click on and see the video, or if the link is not there, I'm gonna put it there. Okay, so so first, before we start, I'm just gonna go around the room fast. If in, I don't know, 20-30 seconds, I'm gonna name some names. If you can tell me or the room, to everybody, off the top of your head, do you see any major barrier to dependability on these open, decentralized networks of production? It may be legal. Yeah, we can see your screen, Barbara. Okay, it may be contracting, it may be legal, it may be technological, but it may be something else. So before we dive into our own understanding and analysis, I would like to get some fresh ideas. So I recognize some names here. And I'll call, if you want to take 20 seconds, 30 seconds to tell us what kind of barriers to dependability do you see, and that could be addressed. And if you just want to go ahead, just raise your hand. Raise your hand if you have an idea now. And I'm going to start the ball rolling with a few individuals that I know they may have an answer. So I don't know if Unai, he's in Africa. He's very involved with local communities. And he has been involved with local makerspaces. I don't know if you can hear us and if you can connect with voice. Sometimes this connection is difficult. But can you take 20-30 seconds to answer this question? And Unai, if you cannot connect, I'm going to jump to... yeah, there we go. Go ahead, Unai. Yeah, okay, we have a connection problem. So let's move to Larry Reader. He's a hardware do-it-yourselfer. So let's see if you have some ideas about that. Sorry for putting you on the spot.
Hey, yeah, that's okay. Hello everyone. I'm actually kind of new to we're working out the parameters of the problem, the challenge, the solutions to an internet of production, but that puts me in a good place to provide fresh ideas or challenges from the context of a newbie. I mean, I can't depend on myself to make the same thing twice the same way, because the second one always wants to be a little better than the first one, and it's a continuous stream of prototyping. So I totally get how a network of makers or fab labs certainly would need to have repeatability in terms of quality, in terms of production capability, for there to be a collaboration to produce something from parts from different sites, right? I guess I think that touches on what you were asking.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's a good dimension. Yes, quality, repeatability, Quality insurance, yes, we've seen these ideas popping up in conversations around the Internet of Production. Thank you, Larry. Constantin Crăciun, that's a Romanian name. I was born in Romania. Let's see if you have some ideas. Sorry for putting you on the spot. Oh, we can't hear you. You unmuted yourself, but there might be a microphone connection problem. Okay, so you're probably going to fix that. Okay, so if you want to intervene after, you can jump in. Richard, we haven't spoken before. Do you have any idea about barriers to dependability, things to improve to be able to depend on open networks for manufacturing? Richard Civil, Richard. Okay.
Hello, are you calling on me?
Yes, please.
Okay. Not quite sure where to start. I think it's not really a barrier, but it's sort of a kind of a larger condition. I was listening to your conversation there, and I started thinking about kind of the bespoke nature of a lot of making activity, worldwide. And so issues around standardization, scaling, cost efficiencies, and, in mass production. Mass production is kind of not where it's at, although when you're attempting to manufacture lots of items in lots of locations that have common, characteristics, where the device or the item is going to be, built locally for local needs, but drawing across, larger, more standardized, designs. I'm kind of thinking about sort of the classic, questions of fabricating artificial limbs in war-torn countries. They all have to be built specifically for a specific individual, using local materials in a local situation, and yet drawing across somewhat, standardized, design. So there's a lot of tension, I think, between, traditional mass production as we've understood it over the last 150 years, and becoming more and more bespoke in the actual, production of the item on the ground, if that's making any sense. But that's kind of what was starting to occur to me.
Okay, let's finish with Kuldeep, because we also have to give the time to Maisam to present our understanding. Sorry, Kuldeep, I'm putting you on the spot because we had an interesting conversation before we started this gathering here, and they gave me a hint that you may have some answers. So how would you, let me reframe the question. How would you, what kind of barriers to dependability, what do you think is important to address in order to make distributed material production open networks more dependable? Kuldeep, can you unmute? Are you able to speak, or if not?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I missed out on the question. My apologies. Can you say the question again?
Yes. So in terms of dependability on distributed material production networks, do you see any important barrier? Is there something that, off the top of your head, should be addressed first as a priority to make these open networks of material production more dependable, more reliable?
I think
it's just like 20-30 seconds.
I think there is, with regards to I think that there are systems that the local supply chain systems that we think that exist in the Western world is not as reliable in our part of the world, right? Especially as you were mentioning, like, war-torn situations, like that you were mentioning. I think the local supply chain, the logistics systems are so unreliable that it the economy lends itself to larger parties who have control over these systems, and because these public systems are not available fully in the quality that we would want and the reliability we would want, that creates a general push towards large-scale production and systems that do not produces for the masses and not for the local needs. I'd say that.
Mhm. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Abul Kafid, he wants to intervene. Please go.
Yeah. Okay. I think looking at the global scale and also the way of organizing Africa, the lack of much more people involved on the production, I think the contracting may be one of the key barrier or point to leverage, because as long as the contracts, the process to do the contracting is much more clear, and then each of the stakeholder could really understand and see how what are they getting from it in a very clear way. I think that would make things much more easier to get, much more people involved on this process of global manufacturing, actually. Yeah.
Are you, just to make it more clear for me to understand, and maybe for myself after, are you saying that contracting would make incentives more clear, like what's in it for everybody in this kind of system?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
So,
in
okay,
a much more shorter way.
okay, so contracting as a means to make the underlying economics of this distributed production more evident, right? Interesting. Yeah. So we did touch a few of these dimensions that we explored based on our hypothesis. So maybe Mason, you can take it from here, and also in your presentation try to relate to some of these reactions from the crowd.
Yeah, guys. So can you hear me? Nice. Very happy to be around you. So what I'm going to do is take you through the journey of what we did in a macro picture in our first report that we submitted. Obviously, there's a link to the report, so you're free to dive in any idea you want in details. So we're going to take you through this journey. And what we're also going to do is take you to the journey of how we do things in Sensorica OVN. And from listening to you guys, I'm very excited because I believe we're here and we live in a similar philosophy. And you're going to see that the way we work things is also something that hits at the core of the problem, is that how did Sensorica be able to achieve materials production? How was Sensorica able to achieve this report in a collaborative way without using contracts and without using smart contracts? And this hits to the initial point Tibi that said, why we reframed the problem statement. So we want to measure dependability on distributed material production networks, and Jack Plenty for All was one example of a different aspect. So if you can please move to the next slide. Yes. So our methodology starts with mapping and understanding. So what we start with doing is actually looking for organizations that are actively pursuing our DMPN model. Now, Sensorica invites group of collaborators that work in their own time. They choose their own time. We have a range of expertise each from every country. And then Sensorica offers this framework of how to work. And every new collaborator has these couple of training sessions to see how Sensorica works collaboratively in a document sheet, for example. For example, in the mapping and understanding phase, we use Digo. So Tibi, do you want me to share the screen and go a bit to the details of Digo and how we do stuff?
I don't know if it's necessary
Okay.
to do that. Maybe just a glance over the coordination page on the website, just for people to see how that is structured. But that's just Barbara that can click on it. Yes. Yeah, that's the one.
So this is the main page where anyone can access, and you can also right now. So this is our coordination page where it shows us what we are working. You have the open main doc for more. This is the main doc right here. Thank you. This is the main document. Now, note that the main working document is different than the report we actually submitted, because obviously the report has to fit certain needs according to IOPA. So you have first the main document, and then you have the IOP report. In the main document, we outline how we work, what we're doing, how we're dissecting the different. So if you stay on the table of contents, please. So there you can see contextualization, methodology, planning, mapping and understanding, engaging, and resources. Again, everything is done collaboratively, peer-to-peer. Now, I'm pretty sure one of the main questions you guys are asking is, okay, how do we go back to the same question. How is the contracting done? How is the accountability done? Well, this is where we have the NRP, which is the Network Resource Planning, versus the ERP, which sorry.
No, it's somebody have to mute
Martin,
somebody.
do you think you can mute yourself?
Yes, it's done. Okay. Yeah, so maybe Barbara, you can just scroll down that page, that web page, scroll down, and just see the more, even more. And yeah, so you can see here the contributions of everybody. So these are the contributions of people that have worked on this study.
So
data from the NRP.
So what is the NRP? The NRP is a network resource planning where we break down the tasks needed to complete a certain project. And then people come in, perform certain tasks, and they assign it on the NRP. Now, this is where the network, this is where Sensorica comes in. So everyone comes in and makes sure. So let's say MySam says, well, I worked an hour in documenting this part X for the IOPA project. This is where everyone in Sensorica comes in and doubles check. It's sort of a validation. And they say, okay, MySam has actually worked this part and it's an hour of worth. And this is where I have an hour of work in the documentation. So this is the dashboard of the NRP where you see where everyone different contributions. Now, if you go back, please, to the presentation, Barbara. Thank you for your constant help. So during this project, we started with mapping and understanding. We mapped out the different organizations that fit what we are looking for. All the data exists on Digo, and it also exists on another spreadsheet that contains all the different organizations. We short this list, we make categories, and we actually made 5 categories. Can you go to the next slide, please?
There's 6.
So as Tibi was explaining, and I heard Barbara also mentioning it, where we can't just rely on a group of lawyers doing everything for us, because what we're doing here is much more complex. So one, we have the legal dimension, which is the lawyers contracting. We have the tech dimension, which is the smart contract, and these are the 2 main dimensions. Now, we noticed during our search there are other dimensions. There is social, ecosystem, economic, and standards. If you go to the next slide, please. So let's say economic. How do some organizations create their own dependability as an economic layer? Well, there's a repetitive game. There's an interdependency. And this is a picture of a restaurant that's in a very small, close neighborhood. Now, this restaurant has to engage in close social behavior with its customers because you want your customers back. You're not a restaurant in a tourist area where the tourist just comes in and you take the maximum amount of money from them and they leave because they know they're probably never going to come back. So there's this repetitive game of keeping, elevating the customers to partners. Now, there are several organizations that use this economic model for dependability. One, as I mentioned, Sensorica, and two, RepRap. If you guys are not familiar with RepRap, but they were the first, if not one of the first, that actually started the 3D open source 3D printers. We go on? All good, guys? Okay. Next slide, please. We have the ecosystem model. It's built on synergy, symbiosis, interdependency. We have the Fab Foundation and breathing games. These are other examples that use the ecosystem model for achieving this dependability. Slide also, please. Social. Stroud Community Agriculture is a group of people in UK that came together. They crowdfunded some money and they bought land. And then they started managing and growing crops in this land in a very communal way. And they shared everything. So you don't buy, you simply go and pick your crops. And they started growing to be a very strong and stable community. And now they're building like sort of a town or gathering center for them. So this is an example of a group of people that were able to use social cues in order to reach that level of dependability. And obviously we have other examples, for example, Open Team. Slide, please. Tech, well, obviously you guys are very familiar with the tech, automated enforcement of consequences or smart contracts. We also found a lot of organizations that use tech to complete their dependability and contracting. And obviously in phase 2 that I'll mention soon, we're going to dig deeper into them. Next slide, please. Legal, self-explanatory. The lawyers, you have LexDAO, Kajenzi, helpful. Next also, please. And finally, standards. For example, IOPA. There's another organization we also met called Plastiscol. So basically, they help communities install containers that communities are able to recycle plastic. So the container contains a 3D printer, a plastic shredder, field-ready material. So they also rely on standards and standardization. Please, Barbara, can I ask you to go back to slide number 5 again, the methodology? So as we move on mapping and understanding the different dimensions and how different distributed manufacturing organizations agree on their dependability on contracting, phase 2 comes to start engaging them. And this is where we also have a Google Sheet ready, accessible for everyone, to see where we dissect different organizations according to the section they fit in, their contact number, the contact person, and this is where we want to start having interviews with them. Now, we also have the list of questions in the interviews ready and accessible in the main project you can check. What we are also going to do is actually transcribe every interview and actually have this thematic academic approach to dissecting them, dissecting the themes. So we're really looking forward to picking the brains of the great people that are part of this community, learn from them. And this is where we want to start drawing the teams and knowing where does everything fit, if we can say that. And as you know, this is a process that we are going to work together at, and we would love to have you part of this. Can you go please to slide 13, Barbara? This is my final slide. This is a picture of an example of the picture of our mapping in Digo. And on the left, of course, you can click to the Excel spreadsheet file that I was mentioning that shows you all the different organizations. So this is it for me. I'm going to give it back to Tibi. Unless anyone has any questions, I'll be delighted.
Yeah, thank you. So if nobody has a question, you can always raise your hand. So the idea here is that, yeah, so just to summarize, 6 dimensions that we uncovered, meaning that organizations operate on, I'm going to put on my camera, organizations operate on all of these dimensions at the same time. Okay, so even if there is some organization that want to facilitate or instigate some network distributed production activity, even though they rely heavily on some form of, I don't know, smart contracts or legal contracts, the other dimensions, they always operate somewhat in the background and come to support the main one, right? And then you can have some organizations that rely, let's say, not explicitly on contracts, but somewhere the legal system is lurking in the background, and people behave just because it exists. And an email agreement could be seen as a contract as well. So somewhere people know that. So even if they're not explicitly signing a contract, the legal system, the existing legal system, still operates at some level. So these are not disconnected or disjoint dimensions. They all operate in the background, but we found that organizations are more conscious about one or two of them, and they put that forward. For example, when we interviewed Jack with Plenty for All, for him, what was very important was an alignment in values. So the culture was very prominent in his language. So in his relationships, he tries to find people that are that have strong values, strong value alignment, and looks for a guarantee that these values are really something that drive the other party, right? And then everything is made to nurture this kind of relationship. So they're very conscious about this kind of cultural alignment and the social layer, and that's how they drive their operations. But it doesn't mean that there are no legal aspects or technology aspects to their operation. Good. So let's go to slide 14, because here what's important to recognize is when you ask the question, like, why are these people using these means to make sure that things happen in their network reliably, and that they can ensure some quality of execution or quality of the end product. Why do they choose this blend of these 6 dimensions? And by the way, the 6 dimension is our hypothesis, so it's on the table to discuss, right? It's just our own hypothesis for the work. It's our own conclusion by reading websites and papers and looking at different organizations, what they do. But anyway, so take it as a hypothesis, is not a way to cut reality. And this should continuously evolve. But so if there is something real about these 6 dimensions, okay, why are people using a specific blend? Why are some people more keen on contracting or smart contracts, and some other people are more keen on the social aspects of their network? And a part of the answer is that their economic reality dictates what dictates that blend, that the blend of measures for increasing dependability. Okay, so the legal contract as a tool may become relevant and necessary within the economic context. So in order to further understand this relationship between dependability of open networks and economic reality, we wanted to give ourselves a language to talk about economic models, and so we looked into pattern languages. Okay, pattern language, pattern patterns are a way to look at designs and to share designs ideas. And when we talk about economic models, it's a thing that things that people design. And so one way to look at many models at the same time is to use pattern language. So we went and we looked for a pattern language, let's say, description of peer-to-peer or peer production economic models, and we could not find it. But you can find a lot of that stuff in the literature for traditional business models, right? So for the purpose of this work, instead of just reinventing the wheel and starting from scratch and designing pattern language for the peer-to-peer economy or distributed or decentralized manufacturing models, we said, why don't we start with some traditional business models and translate them into peer-to-peer models, because the peer-to-peer world is not completely out of this world, right? So there's a transformation going on, so we can apply this transformation matrix to the traditional business models and see what we can get on the other side, right? When you describe a traditional business model, usually you ask the questions what, who, how, and why. And so, for example, what is your product? How are you going to provide value to your customer? What is the utility? Who is your customer, and why are you doing this? Like, is it profitable or not? Okay, that's the traditional language. And so you're talking about value proposition, value chain, and revenue model. So there's a sort of a transformational matrix that you can apply to that and end up with a different language where the product, instead of talking about the products, you talk about benefits for stakeholders in the network. Instead of talking about utility, you talk about vitality. Like, what is this thing, this network give to its stakeholders in order for them to thrive? Instead of talking about customer, you talk about stakeholders. Instead of talking about profitability or profit, you talk about sustainability, right? How can this network be self-sustained and in relation with the community that it serves? Value chain becomes regenerative network flows. So instead of having a value chain or even a supply, thinking about in terms of a supply chain, you think about information and materials that are transacted in this network that are generative, meaning that they sustain this network and are able to bring something new into existence, right? Instead of revenue model, how do I make money? How does the network make money? You talk about symbiosis model. What is in it for everyone? What can an entity in a network, what is a makerspace in a network, can provide to the network, and what it can take from the network? What is an open source hardware design community? Okay, gonna provide to a bunch of makerspaces for local production, and what are they able to take from that? Okay, so we see all these different nodes with different specializations: a makerspace, an open source hardware community, an open source software community, I don't know, some cryptocurrency groups with a blockchain. All these things together, they're in symbiosis, and the network is not looking at making profits. The network is looking at what can we give and what can we benefit from this kind of arrangement.
Tiberius?
Yes.
I'm looking at the time, and there are some questions that have come in that are relevant to what you're talking about right
Perfect.
now, and I want to make sure that we have a moment to address them. And one of them is a very, speaking of vocabulary, one of the questions is, can you define, what is your working definition for dependability? You touched upon that at the beginning, but it would be good to remind or define that now as you're speaking of this. And then there are a couple of questions more. So could you start with that? What would be what is your working definition for dependability?
Yes. So dependability is it's a measure of how much we can rely on organization or on a process. How much can we depend on it? It's a measure of determinism. Okay. Do we know that? For example, let's transfer that from the traditional economy. You know that you can place an order to a company to make something for you, and realistically, they can respond within a week. Okay, so they can process your order and ship you the product within a week, with very high probability. Okay, so we can depend on that, and this is how supply chains are built. Okay, they're built on dependability of every agent in the supply chain. Everyone above knows that they can just in time, order and receive the part from downstream. Okay, and so it's a measure of determinism of the process, which is related to not just the materials that go into production, but it's also related to the organizational context. Like, how is the management of that company? What are the methods that they use and the processes that they use? Can we trust the whole thing? Okay, as a black box to put an order and get something shipped within a week.
And in the framework that you're describing,
yes.
Are you hinting at that the dependability in this context comes from the legal side because there's a contract?
Well, the legal, yeah. So the legal is only one tool. Okay, it's only one tool. I mean, you can say that now the company becomes a network of separate entities. Okay, so you have a bunch of makerspaces. Can you go to slide 15? Okay, so that's a model. Okay, so you have a network. You have some community, some open source hardware developers. Okay, these are communities. They're entities on their own. You have an NGO that could be part of this network. You have some other organizations that act as repositories, a wiki. Some community is running a wiki of open source hardware, for example, in software. And then you have the local makerspaces and the users, right? So these are all separate entities. So dependability here is the dependability not necessarily of an individual component of this network, but it's the dependability of the entire network. In the end, is if the NGO pokes this network to deliver some specific, I don't know, 3D printed equipment to users. Okay, so the input is the NGO, the output is to the user. Okay, how can the NGO trust the whole ecosystem here, that developers are going to come and tweak that model so that it fits the needs of the user, and then the local makerspaces are going to make it. And then when they're going to make it, they're going to pull the design from a trusted repository so they know that the quality is ensured and all that. Okay, so the NGO asks the question, how dependable is the whole network, which depends on dependability of every one of these actors. Okay, but there is also something in between, which is at the organizational level. Is the communication between them okay? Are there standards among them? And yes, is there a contract that can force them to act, to behave in a specific way? But the contract is not all. Okay, it's a tool. It's only one dimension of dependability. Maybe there is these actors are strongly aligned in values. Maybe they respond to a humanitarian crisis, in which case, like we saw during COVID, we don't need much of a contract in between people because they're so strongly aligned with the purpose of helping in that particular moment, which is highly intense in emotions and all that, a legal contract, a lawyer would just go in the way of the process and slow down things, not necessarily help it. So we see that in different contexts and different models or economic models. Yeah.
So Kuldeep had a couple of questions that I find particularly interesting around like accountability and around consumer protection. And before I hand the mic over to him for him to ask the questions, I want to get a sense of how much more do you have in the presentation, because we're pretty much wrapping up the hour. So this would take us into leaving the call open afterwards, but people aren't obligated to stay beyond. So I want to make sure that they get what you meant to show in this presentation. Is there a lot more, or should we open the questions?
No, the rest of the questions are just support for discussions. So
Yeah.
so the 14 was the last question, but I would jump to 18 because it's a much more
I don't actually have the
diverse
numbers. So you mean like,
diagram. 3 slides down.
thank you.
Yes, because it's almost the same thing.
This one?
Yeah, it's almost the same thing, but it's a bit more complex. It shows like a more diverse ecosystem of distributed production. So we can leave it there so we can discuss on top of that.
Super. So I am going to just give closing remarks, and then we will continue into further discussion, but I'm going to give those closing remarks for anybody who needs to drop off at the top of the hour. One closing remark is make note of the next community call, which will be on the 20th, and the one that will be either on the 12th or the 13th, focusing specifically on mapping manufacturing locations. That's the first comment. The second one is to ask you, Tiberius, what's next and how can people engage? In like just a couple of words, where can they connect? And before you answer that question, I want to mention that speaking of the legal side, we're going to be bringing on an additional angle to this research, which is bringing in lawyers to look at that and see what they think about it, so that the next time that we present results from this, we can also have these contrasting views. So if you're interested in hearing that, then keep an eye out for the newsletters, because you'll be able to hear more from that at the next time that we present the progress on the contracting. But Tibi, handing it back to you, how can people engage if they need to drop off in a minute? What do they need to know? Where do they need to go?
Yes, perfect. So the best way to follow the project is on IOPA's forum, and just type in contracting and search, and you'll find the posts and engage through there. The next step is to, first of all, we're going to discuss these 6 dimensions that we found, and then the next step is to take 120 plus organizations that we mapped and put them into 6 categories according to these 6 levels, and invite them to workshops, okay, to dig deeper into how they do and what they do specifically to ensure dependability. And I have to say that we need to we also want to focus on 2 specific dimensions, which is the legal contracting and the smart contracts, which is the tech side, because this is where the sort of the critical mass around IOPA is. This is where the stakeholders are. So it's for building community and building networks, is good to cater to the present stakeholders. So that when we think this is the most prominent dimension, and so we're going to put more emphasis on that one there. Speaking to your next community call with some attorneys, some lawyers, and discuss the legal side of it, right? Yeah. So that's for the next steps.
Super. And I just need to close on one last thing, which is thanking the groups that make this possible. As I was mentioning at the beginning, this whole research is funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation and the European Union Horizon 2020 program. And the date that you need to keep in your calendars if you want to get involved in how we run things over here. So if you want to get involved with the governance of the Internet of Production Alliance, join the call on the 20th of April. And if you need to run at the top of the hour, now's the time. But you are very, very welcome to stay to continue the conversation. I'm going to switch back to the illustration that Tiberius was showing. And I'd like to give the microphone over to you, Kuldeep, because you had a couple of questions